Hello and welcome to BlueChip's newsjacking webinar.
Today we're going to be tackling newsjacking Australia's federal budget, how you go about it and why you want to be getting onto it pretty soon,
Right.
if you're not doing it already. Let me introduce Carden, Managing Director and Founder of BlueChip. Carden, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Here we are in our own offices.
In our own office, yeah.
We're here to talk to you today on the basis of, between us, a frightening number of years, either covering or campaigning budget inside large organisations or for our clients. So my background is, more than 20 years of actually working out how to make the best use of federal budget and other major news events for people like the large financial institutions in this country, both as a person in-house running those sort of almost war rooms, and then also as a consultant in PR, media and marketing and issues management on the outside of large organisations, coming in as an external counsel to help them get it right.
And for my part, I come from a journalism background, specifically broadcast journalism. So I actually have been in the federal budget lockup, spent a couple of years as a political reporter in Canberra a long time ago, during the pre-Twitter Howard government days. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of, what are the deadlines, what is the mindset of the journalist that's in that room, and all of the apparatus around that, how it gets to print, how it gets to air, and how our clients can newsjack that process to maximise what they want to do. So in terms of what we're going to be doing today, we're going to talk you through how you can successfully do this and really leave you with some insights that can help you faster and better to get where you want to go.
So we put a bit of time and thought into this, and we've come up with 7 top tips. We're going to talk you through those 7 now. The most important is probably the one at the end, but the one we want to talk about first is the one that you have to do first, because we're right in the window now. Before we go there,
let's talk about what is newsjacking and why do we care about it.
Right. So newsjacking is, as per the webinar promo, is either shameless self-promotion or perhaps slightly more strategically and in a corporate sense, is injecting your agenda into a news agenda. So it's getting your ideas into the news cycle. Why would we want to do that? Well, lots of good reasons. One is that you build the reputation of the brand, you get greater awareness for who you are and what you're doing, but you can get as far down the marketing goals path as delivering leads for yourself by doing really good federal budget news commentary, and we'll talk through how you can do that. But if you think about it from the absolute broadest and most least risk point of view, from the, if you're making commitments about goals internally, then absolutely the clear commercial goal here is to gain great media coverage. It's to help your clients. It's to position yourself as a thought leader by offering expert commentary.
First tip, the first thing that we would say in terms of newsjacking is planning.
Right. And if you don't do it beforehand, it's too late.
Yeah.
You can't, this is not something on budget eve that you can decide to do something about, because you're up against people who've spent a year thinking about what they're going to do and they've got 30 years worth of experience doing it really well. You don't need that level of expertise. What you do need to do is give yourself, regardless of the size of your team, you might be one person or you might have 30 people working on this effort, but you need to give yourself lead time. Why do you need lead time? It might sound self-evident, but for budget, there are some absolutely clear reasons that you have to be keeping an eye out before budget night and really getting some preparation in place. And Jackie, one of the things that you and I have talked about is the need to be watching the national news agenda, the need to be clear on the potential scenarios, the potential news angles, the potential budget announcements, and actually preparing commentary for several different eventualities. And then also, I think, be a keen observer of political debate.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so much about language. It's not 6 weeks before, but throughout the entire year, you can tell just from the smallest shift in language of a minister or a shadow minister what is and isn't going to be in the budget, because they're signposting that, they're softening ground for the most part.
Flying a kite?
Flying a kite. So you can essentially have commentary prepared, as Carden has said, and that might sound a little bit like a waste of time. Some people might think, well, that's ridiculous. Why would we not wait until we know exactly what's in the budget paper to react to it and then get out to our audience? Well, I can tell
it's
you
too late.
It's
right.
Too late. So often in the BlueChip News Centre on budget night, we will have commentary on 5 or 6 different policies that just needs to be tweaked at the last moment from spokespeople. To do that, of course, you have to have an incredibly engaged team, and you have to have an incredibly engaged spokesperson that has been watching all of the issues insofar as that they affect that particular industry that those clients are in and their stakeholders. So that work is, as we've said, it's not a 6-week process, it's not overnight. You need to be doing that all year.
So I think that's actually the single most important determinant of success in newsjacking is it is the planning. And there are a couple of bits to it. So our number one tip is planning. And then really what follows on from that quite clearly to us is something like trend following, probably. You can call it all sorts of different things, but our number 2 tip would be to be watching carefully what's going on in news media, and then also using analytic tools like Google Trends or social media monitoring and sentiment analysis to work out what the potential cresting topics are, or the topics that you can make crest or tap into.
All right, so the second tip that we want to talk to you about today, we would call essentially trend spotting and trend watching. And by that we mean being across exactly what is coming out of Canberra, what's coming out of industry, what is the scuttlebutt, what does it all say, what do people care about, what are they busting to know. Would you agree with that, Carden?
Absolutely. And as well as those observations, there are analytic tools you can use to really get yourself ahead of the game. So Google Trends is a good one. Your own social media monitoring, the sentiment analysis around that is really helpful to know. If you are doing social listening in the lead up to budget or any other major news event, you can tap into the sentiment, you can understand what matters most to people, and you can quantify that sentiment and map it back to your own corporate goals and your own corporate content. Now, in the industry, the wealth management industry, there are recurring themes. One of them might be retirement savings adequacy. It's a huge issue. It's not going anywhere. What that translates to at an individual person level is, will I have enough money to retire? And it's that kind of, retirement income, real hip pocket nerve stuff that, you might then be watching in news. So it's very much an analytic and quantitative thing, but it's also an observational skill of being a good observer, I think.
Yeah, and it often comes down to a particular policy within that space. So if I think back to previous years, there's been a lot of change in superannuation. In every facet of that, so much change, and that's obviously something that affects all the boomers, and that's certainly one that we continue to watch. I'm thinking also, even things like last year's incentives for home downsizing, to try and affect the property market and those sorts of things. That's what we mean by trend spotting.
Right. Okay, so tip number 3 is what's in it for me. Now, if you can pardon my terrible rhyme, the point about that is we have to be saying something directly to an individual. It has to be directly relevant to them. So no matter what you're newsjacking, we could use the, newsroom kind of rules. What is it? Head, heart, hip pocket?
Heart, health, and hip pocket.
Right, so hip pocket simply means what is the impact on my wallet? So last year, for example, with one of our clients, we were really clear. This budget that was heading, the 2016-2017 budget, was very much going to affect retirees. It was going to affect people who were already drawing down on their super, and it was going to have a significant, potentially very significant effect for some people. And so we zeroed in on that, and we positioned our clients' expertise exactly to the impact for those folk and helped them work out what to do next. What is the size of the issue? How can I either avoid this? If it's not avoidable, how do I need to restructure my affairs? These were the sorts of topics that we went in on. And I know that's at the retail end, but at the macro end, if you're an institutional investor and you know, for example, that you've got a big infrastructure spending budget coming up, then you want to be starting to position yourself in that space and working out what you're going to say, for example, to a fund manager or to the superannuants who rely on you about what a heavy infrastructure spend budget might mean for their investment strategy.
Absolutely, and those organisations or those members of those organisations that are then seeing their brand and their spokespeople out there talking about these exact things, they themselves will feel comforted by that, and they'll feel better about themselves because they'll think that they're with the experts.
So we're really in the business of guiding our stakeholders through their understanding of what a federal budget means for them. And as we do that, we have to be very, very clear that the test all our content has to pass, all our commentary has to pass, is what is in it for me, the end audience. Which, by the way, relies on being clear on who the end audience actually is. So you have to be focused in this. You cannot be all things to all people. Let's talk about speed. Now, journalists know more about this than anybody, but to understand why timing and speed matter so much on budget night, you really have to understand how the budget process works. And that's a little bit about Canberra and Parliament and how the media react and the kind of access that media have to budget papers.
Mm-hmm.
Jacqui has been there and seen it
Mm-hmm.
and lived through that experience. So can you just share a little bit with us about how the reality of budget night unfolds?
Sure. So ultimately, a couple of people from each news organisation are nominated to be able to go into the lockup. That happens weeks and weeks in advance, so you should know from each organisation, Fairfax News, ABC, who it is, who's going to be in and who's going to be out. But we'll come to why that's important later. Ultimately, it happens late in the afternoon. You're in there for a couple of hours. When you walk in, the wonderful people at Parliament House take away your mobile phone. So you don't have that. So you can't contact anybody from the outside world. What you can do is pour through the hundreds of pages of the budget document and start to draw out for the Australian public what is this and what does it mean and why do I care? So what you've got is a couple of hundred people sitting around in this huge, big Parliament House office that has producers and editors and graphics departments and cameramen, because you're filming, shooting, writing absolutely everything that's going to be the first thing that the Australian public read and see as soon as the Treasurer walks out simultaneously and starts to deliver the budget from the dispatch box, just as he's then also letting out all those exhausted, tired journalists that need to go to the bathroom. So that's happening at the same time. So ultimately...
So that happens at what time? 7:30. The Treasurer commences the budget speech.
Right.
And is it at 7:30 that the federal government's media embargo is lifted?
That's
At
correct.
that very moment, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And so for most corporates, that's the first time they're going to know the reality, and it won't be in the first minute, but they're not going to get, because media organisations can post their reports online at the same time.
That's
now.
right. The budget papers will also be posted online at the same time. So organisations will ultimately be going to the same coverage that the average punter is going to initially, to look at, well, what is the detail and how does it affect me? And then it's the mad scramble.
And the technical people inside large corporates have probably had a hand in budget papers. They may not know what's going to make it in and what's going to be left out. So in my experience of working inside large corporates and working with clients who've got significantly resourced and really capable technical people, they're close enough to Treasury and to government to be giving advice and to, in some cases, be determining what goes into budget papers. So it's not hard to do a Control F and actually do a quick find of certain phrases in budget papers to find the absolutely specifically relevant bits to your target audience.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very true. I would also add that you've got to look at the bigger context of, in this instance, this is most likely the last, in fact, definitely the last budget.
Before an election.
I would be very surprised.
So we're expecting
this.
What you're saying is we'd be expecting what we call an election budget.
That's right.
Typically generous. What that means is that there's going to be some significant, we'd expect some significant benefit for individuals who may or may not be important in the next election.
That's right. But then also, is that responsible policy? Is it good, bad for the economy?
So that's where the analysis is going to come in the hour after budget. Mm-hmm. So we're sort of talking about, you've got lockup, which is all underneath the water level. Treasurer goes out and commences the speech. Media organisations publish their analysis, their summaries, and it all goes out there, and then corporates have their opportunity to respond.
Exactly.
Unless, and not everyone can do this, unless you can make a point for being a publisher yourself and get yourself into lockup. Now, some organisations can do that. Member-based associations who have a member publication that is more broadly circulated can actually get into the lockup.
Mm-hmm. But I'd also say that in the press gallery in Parliament House, they have the pigeonholes there are called boxes.
The dispatch boxes.
So the pigeonholes.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Boxes, dispatch boxes. So ultimately, a line of 30, 40 people, interest groups, organisations, stakeholders from all over the economy literally line up, and it is the job of the 2GBs and the 2UEs and the junior burger reporters and newspaper people to go and stand there, and it's literally a conga line, like this, and they each go 30 seconds, they get their grab. It can be as ridiculous as that, and then, in the pre-Twitter Howard era that I was there, press releases, 2,000 of them in 5 seconds, because you want to get your message out, you want to get your message up, but you've got to be faster, more strategic, and have more compelling content, I think, to cut through all that noise.
Right.
And that's what we want to help you with.
Okay, so let's talk about cut through. So tip number 5 is to keep it personal. Now that can happen on a couple of levels. One is personal with the journalists, and the other is personal in terms of who this is actually personally going to affect, if it's a budget or really any other news story. So my experience of keeping it personal is some 25 years of dealing with journalists, actually not quite 25, but darn close, and being able to say to them in advance of budget, one-on-one, here are the sorts of commentators and threads of story that we think you're going to be interested in at 7:31 once budget's released. And, I've got this talent for you, I've got this spokesperson, they will have X, Y, and Z kind of commentary.
And they're going to be for or against?
Right, yeah, okay.
Because it's an equation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what is it? Who's for it? Who's against it?
Yeah. If this, then that. Like, if it's X, we're going to be coming out strongly against that, or, we probably won't say much, but we'll be able to explain, won't say much in terms of this is bad or good, but we can say it's objectively, but we can say it's bad or good for person X. Mm-hmm. And those kinds of arrangements can be made in the weeks leading up to budget, but it can also be that something came out that was unexpected, and in the moment at 7:31 or in that crucial first 10 minutes, we get a DM or a text message to a journalist saying, I've got so-and-so, their view is X, do you want to chat to them at 7:40?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really, really minute-by-minute stuff. And then, so that might mean that you get something on the front page of the Financial Review with an infrastructure. This particular budget might be an infrastructure investor with a picture of an asset behind them. That has to be set up way in advance. So it kind of links back to our point about lead time in terms of getting talent in the corporate news. But if I switch that over now and think about, okay, let's say you've got a much more mass media play and you're a more consumer-centric business, or you might be one of the large institutions who wants to say something really meaningful to consumers about this budget and you want to influence the flavour of news reporting, then the sorts of things that you experienced as a journalist covering it are really helpful to know, and we use those techniques. So for example, in years past, we've gone to journalists and we've said, we can pre-package this for you using the media experience you've had of covering budget, getting individuals to spec talent.
Well, so exactly. So if you can budget to a time-poor journo, that you have a spokesperson that has a view on what the change has been, and you have a case study of an individual or group or an organisation that is affected by that change, it's half the work.
So you're really covering both ends. You've got the lovely personal story, and I know that you've done things with, say, multi-generational families, or as a junior reporter, you've had to door knock.
Door knocking. I once convinced, and I'm ashamed to tell you all this, but I once door knocked a family in Sydney, houses around the inner west, and this lovely couple let me into their home so that me and my cameraman and soundo could film this family. Middle Australian
so
family,
invasive.
Watching the budget. We were there for hours.
This is Gogglebox before Gogglebox happened.
And and that was run all over the country, and the next morning and into the 11 a.m. news the next day. And I don't remember the name of the family, but thank you wherever you are. Would you ever do that? I would never do that. But it's that kind of thing. It's like you want the personal reaction, and you want the spokesperson expert.
And so now for brands, what you're doing and what you did last year was actually find that talent well ahead of budget night, or well ahead of a major news night, and have them ready to react and give that to the news media, so they don't have to do that running around, because they don't have the resources to do that anymore.
Exactly. And we got really, we were really happy with the outcomes with one particular campaign, because we were sort of front page of the Sydney Morning Herald's business section, and particularly in the property space, when there's changes to superannuation, there's always going to be a big appetite, so it affects everybody. So here's the expert client, and here's
the individual.
An individual who is saying their lived experience is backing up what the client expert is saying about the policy. Boom, front page, done. So I've taken you through some of the most important things to keep in mind if you want to be successful in newsjacking events, particularly the federal budget. We've talked about how important planning is, how important speed is for getting your message out to audiences. But now, because all organisations can essentially be self-publishers, and you're not relying always on the media to be the gatekeeper of your message to audiences and viewers. If you're going straight to market, you're going straight to Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're going, we need to talk about your content.
Top tip number 6. We're nearly done. This is our second last tip, but it really feeds into the last one and the most important one. And the thing about the content is that any technical person, any decent technical person in a large, for example, wealth management or asset management brand, can write the 3 to 30 page inverted commas summary. But the real gift here and the real trick is to create short, sharp, visually arresting content that is accurate. It does not have to be the most profound insight, but what it does need to be is first to market and worth looking at.
Absolutely. So you really want to call out, say, a compelling PDF with 5 of the takeaways for your stakeholders in your industry is going to put you at the front of the pack. And if you're taking into account, you've planned already what you think those might be, you've had the speed and the agility to get it out to market, then your content, if you put all of those things together, success.
I think too, there's a point here about saying what happens when. So day one, hour one, you want that really short, sharp content, and day one, you want that short, sharp content. You may still be able to campaign that in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or you may need to edit it. But what you will need is layers of content. This is one layer. It's possibly the most effective. That's not to say that you don't still need really high quality technical analysis for advisors, for high net worth investors, and for very sophisticated investors. Bearing in mind, almost never on budget night or with any other news event do you have all the information you need to create that depth of content in the first blush.
Okay, top tip 7. 70-30. It sounds very mysterious. Carden, can you please explain to us what is this mysterious 70-30 rule?
Look, it's a bit cynical. So when I was a youngster working in a very large, well-known brand, I was told by a well-meaning fellow senior executive that what I needed to understand about getting ahead in corporate was that it was 30% ability and 70% visibility. It was music to my ears because I wasn't sure how much substance I had, but I also found it quite cynical and completely counter to the way that I thought things worked in big business was that it was 90% capability and intellect and work ethic and 10% visibility. He was right. So one of my big takeouts is that it is 70% communication and 30% content. It's a bit startling, it's disturbing, but it's also just the way it is. Now, when I say 30% content, I'm not being disrespectful about the quality of content that's needed. It needs to be accurate, all the things we've talked about already. But the reality is that in the war rooms I've run or been part of, and the efforts I've been part of campaigning a news event, is that the creation of the content and the origin of the analysis is probably, X, and 3 to 5X is the communication of it, even by the people who created that content. So when we say amplification, it should be multi-channel, it should be integrated, and it should be multi-platform these days.
Sounds good to me.
Anything you'd add?
Well, just also that traditionally I think, that financial services firms probably have been a bit hamstrung by the fact that there's so much compliance, that the real-time nature of newsjacking specifically as a marketing tool has proved difficult. So I'm really encouraged to hear that you received that.
The lawyers are working late that night. Yeah. It's a sort of a moment of pure joy watching the legal team pull an all-nighter. And that's sometimes the reality of it, is that to be able to amplify it, you need sign-off, you've got to go through all those processes, and then you can get it to market in a really effective way. And to me, that's actually probably that and the planning. That's why we've bookended them as number 1 and number 7. They're the 2 most important things you can do to set yourself well up to newsjack any event in financial services, be that superannuation, be it insurance, be it savings and credit cards, investment management, every single bit of it. Good planning around the news event, and then really understanding the role of the communication versus the content itself.
Let's run through the 7 steps now to success when it comes to newsjacking an event such as the federal budget. Number 1 is planning. Number 2, trend following. Number 3, what's in it for me? Number 4 is speed. Number 5 is about keeping it personal. Number 6, you want content that is short, sharp and accurate. And number 7, the golden rule, 70-30. We've reached the end of our 7 points for newsjacking success, and we're going to share those with you. We'll be emailing you through a transcript of what you've heard today, but also...
I think, we are, but we're also going to send the one-pager, right?
That's right. So we'll condense that down as a short, sharp, compelling piece of content for you to have a look at and hopefully share. If you like what you've seen today, share it.
Please send it to the team. If you're working on budget already or a major news event, but really the logical one that might be coming up is federal budget, share this with your colleagues who are on the project team, because it will help you work better together if you have a shared understanding. Similarly, if you know colleagues who might be working on this outside other organisations and you think it's worthwhile, send it to them. And then if you don't think it's worthwhile, let us know, because we'd like to improve it. This is our first webinar in this format. We're only doing them for you, and you are our clients. You're the people who work inside client organisations, and you're people who might be interested in working with us or have worked with us in the past. So we want to start to build a real body of knowledge that's helpful around communication, PR, marketing and issues management in financial services. We'd love your ideas. What are your unanswered questions? Let us know. And right now we're going to go to live chat.